Welcome to Mind Diagnosis Lab, where we explore the intricate world of psychological disorders. I'm Farshed, a researcher at the University of Missouri. In this inaugural episode, we journey through the history of psychopathology, tracing how our understanding of mental health has transformed from ancient superstitions to modern science. Episode 1: Understanding Psychological Disorders. History, Stigma, and Definitions. Historical overview of psychological disorders. Supernatural explanations. Imagine living in a world where the fluttering of a bird's wings or the alignment of stars could determine your fate, including whether you were considered sane or insane. For centuries, societies around the world attributed unusual behavior, whether it be incoherent speech, self-injury, or extreme mood swings, to the invisible workings of supernatural forces. Early Chinese, Hebrew, Egyptian, Babylonian, and Greek cultures believed that these behaviors signaled that the individual was either possessed by evil spirits or being punished by divine forces for some moral transgression. In these ancient times, treatment for psychological disturbance wasn't based on science. It was ritualistic. Exorcisms were performed with the hope of driving out evil entities. These could involve chanting, prayer, fasting, and sometimes violent practices, like whipping or burning. A particularly brutal treatment was trephination, where a small hole was drilled into the skull to release the evil spirit. What we see here is not just a lack of medical understanding, but a deeply ingrained fear of the unknown, a fear so strong it justified terrifying interventions. But then came a pivotal shift, one that pulled human understanding closer to natural explanations. Hippocrates, a Greek physician born in 460 BCE, stands as a beacon in the history of medicine. He proposed that mental illness, like any physical illness, stemmed from natural bodily processes, not wrathful gods or evil spirits. He believed the brain was the seat of consciousness, thought, and emotion. If someone's behavior deviated from the norm, it was due to something going wrong in the brain. Hippocrates introduced the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Each humor was associated with specific temperaments and health states. An excess of black bile, for instance, was believed to result in melancholia, what we might now refer to as depression. Treatment involved restoring the balance of humors through diet, exercise, rest, and sometimes more invasive procedures like bloodletting. This marked an early turn toward empirical observation and a legacy that still informs biological approaches in psychiatry today. The Dark Ages and religious reversion. However, progress is not always linear. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe entered the Dark Ages, and the rational, observational approach of the Greeks was overshadowed by religious orthodoxy. Once again, supernatural explanations for mental illness gained traction. The Christian Church, now the dominant institution, framed psychological disturbances as moral failings or spiritual corruption. Mentally ill individuals were often left to the care of monks or priests who relied on prayer, holy water, relics, and occasionally torture to heal what they saw as spiritual diseases. This era saw the return of fear-based treatments. The mentally ill were often isolated or subjected to public scorn. Many were cast out or left to roam the countryside in poverty. Scientific inquiry was stifled, and mental illness became a mark of disgrace rather than a condition to be treated. By the 13th century, as towns expanded and administrative systems evolved, governments began taking responsibility for managing mental illness. Lunacy trials in England were not focused on punishment, but rather on determining legal responsibility and appointing guardianship. While these trials reflected a more organized approach, the underlying attitudes still bore the remnants of superstition. The term lunacy itself reflects beliefs that mental illness was linked to the phases of the moon. Although less brutal than outright exorcisms, lunacy trials reinforced the notion that mentally ill individuals were different, unpredictable, and in need of control. With the decline of leprosy, old leprosariums were repurposed into asylums in the 15th and 16th centuries. Among the most infamous was the Priory of St. Mary of Bethlehem in London, later known as Bedlam. Instead of being places of healing, these asylums often became houses of horror. Patients were chained, beaten, and neglected. By the 18th century, Bedlam had become a tourist attraction where visitors paid to gawk at patients as if they were animals in a zoo. Treatment methods were not much better. For instance, Benjamin Rush, an American physician and signer of the Declaration of Independence, advocated for bleeding and scaring patients as a form of therapy. He believed that mental illness was due to excessive blood in the brain. The field still lacked a coherent theory grounded in biology, psychology, or social science. In the late 18th century, however, the winds of change began to blow again. French physician Philippe Pinel became a pioneer of the moral treatment movement. He insisted that patients be treated with dignity, offered purposeful work, and placed in clean, well-ventilated environments. Though Jean-Baptiste Poussin was the first to unchain patients, Pinel's reforms popularized the movement. In the U.S., Dorothea Dix campaigned tirelessly for the creation of state-funded mental hospitals. She established more than 30 institutions and sought to professionalize mental health care. But even well-intentioned reforms could not withstand the pressures of growing demand. Overcrowding and underfunding soon turned these once promising institutions into warehouses for the mentally ill. In the mid-20th century, new medications and civil rights movements led to deinstitutionalization. The goal was noble: move patients out of hospitals and into community-based care. But the follow-through was lacking. Community mental health centers were underfunded or never built. Consequently, jails, homeless shelters, and emergency rooms became the primary sites for psychiatric care. In 1955, there were 340 public psychiatric beds per 100,000 people. Today, there are fewer than 12. More people with mental illness are incarcerated than hospitalized, a sobering indictment of our current system. When we talk about mental illness or psychological disorder, it's important to clarify what exactly we mean. These are not merely terms to describe someone acting strangely or feeling down. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM-5, provides a carefully structured definition that helps professionals determine whether someone meets the clinical threshold for diagnosis. A psychological disorder is defined as a syndrome characterized by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or developmental processes underlying mental functioning. It usually leads to significant distress or disability in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Distress is often the most visible feature of mental illness. People struggling with anxiety may feel overwhelmed by dread. Those experiencing depression might find everyday tasks exhausting and meaningless. In Felicia's case, later discussed, her childhood was filled with confusion, frustration, and ridicule, clear signs of personal distress before her ADHD diagnosis. However, distress alone does not always indicate disorder. For instance, grief following the death of a loved one can be intense and long-lasting, but this is a culturally and contextually appropriate emotional response. Similarly, not all individuals with mental disorders show personal distress. Some may lack insight into their own conditions or experience conditions that impair others more than themselves, e.g., antisocial personality disorder. Disability refers to disruptions in one's ability to function effectively in day-to-day life. This might include problems at school, in relationships, or at work. A child with ADHD who cannot complete schoolwork or form friendships is facing functional impairment. Jack, who experiences hallucinations, finds it difficult to secure housing, not due to his symptoms alone, but due to public fear and stigma, another form of indirect functional impairment. A key point here is that a diagnosis often hinges on how much a condition interferes with daily life. Someone who has obsessive thoughts but functions well at work and in relationships might not meet diagnostic criteria. This highlights the DSM-5's emphasis on clinically significant impairment. Humans live in groups and societies bound together by implicit rules, social norms. These norms help ensure predictability and cohesion. When someone's behavior starkly deviates from these norms, like engaging in public nudity, incessant shouting, or violence, they may be perceived as disordered. What counts as a social norm in one culture may be a sacred practice in another. For instance, certain spiritual experiences considered pathological in Western psychiatry, like hearing voices, may be viewed as divine communication in indigenous cultures. Hence, cultural context is key, and clinicians must be careful not to pathologize culturally sanctioned behaviors. This component is perhaps the most abstract. A dysfunction refers to the breakdown or failure in internal mechanisms of the mind, mechanisms that are supposed to regulate emotion, perception, memory, or behavior. It's not simply acting abnormally, but something has gone wrong in how the brain or mind functions. This could be due to abnormalities in neural circuits, imbalances in neurotransmitters, trauma-induced disruptions in development, or a confluence of genetic, social, and psychological factors. The dysfunction model frames mental illness within a biopsychosocial framework, recognizing biological vulnerability, psychological processes, and environmental stressors all as contributors. A crucial caveat in the DSM-5's framework is cultural awareness. It explicitly warns against misinterpreting culturally normative behavior as pathological. Grief, for example, manifests differently across cultures. Some may wail loudly and physically, others may remain stoic. Similarly, spiritual visions or ancestral visitations are normal in many traditional societies. Clinicians must take into account a patient's cultural background before making a diagnosis. The DSM-5 also includes cultural formulation tools, which help clinicians evaluate symptoms in the proper cultural context. This evolution reflects a growing awareness that Western psychiatric models must be applied thoughtfully and respectfully across diverse populations. Not all suffering is a disorder, and not all eccentricity is pathological. The DSM-5 sets a threshold for diagnosis. Symptoms must be pervasive, persistent, and impairing. For example, nearly everyone experiences anxiety occasionally, but generalized anxiety disorder requires chronic, uncontrollable worry across multiple areas of life for at least 6 months. This threshold approach avoids overdiagnosis, ensuring that we don't medicalize normal emotional reactions or cultural variations. Yet it also ensures that those truly suffering receive appropriate care. In sum, defining psychological disorders is a nuanced process that requires evaluating distress, disability, norm violations, dysfunction, and cultural context. The goal is not to label, but to understand, and through understanding, to heal. Despite scientific advances and growing public discussion around mental health, stigma remains one of the most enduring and damaging forces in the lives of individuals with psychological disorders. To understand the scope of this challenge, we must unpack what stigma is, how it manifests, and what can be done to reduce its impact. Stigma is not just about name-calling or ignorance. It's a layered societal phenomenon that affects how people with mental illnesses are perceived, treated, and even how they see themselves. According to sociologist Irving Goffman, Stigma arises when someone possesses a characteristic that is devalued by society, resulting in them being seen as tainted or discredited. Labeling. A person is given a label that marks them as different, crazy, unstable, dangerous. Separation. The labeled individual is seen as other or fundamentally different from the norm, creating an us versus them dynamic. Stereotyping. Society attaches negative beliefs to this label, such as believing people with schizophrenia are violent or unpredictable. Status loss and discrimination. The final result is diminished opportunities in employment, housing, education, and healthcare. Individuals may internalize this stigma, leading to shame and isolation. Let's take a real example. Jack, a man living with schizophrenia, manages his condition well using medication. Yet, when he applied for housing, he was turned down after disclosing his diagnosis. The landlord feared he might become violent, despite there being no history or indication of such behavior. This fear wasn't grounded in Jack's behavior, but in societal myths. The effects of stigma are devastating and multifaceted. People with mental illness often report feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, and a reduced sense of identity. Stigma can also discourage individuals from seeking treatment out of fear of judgment or labeling. In the 1999 U.S. Surgeon General's report, stigma was declared the most formidable obstacle to progress in mental health care. Research by Pesco-Solido et al. 2010 found that despite increased public awareness and biological explanations for mental illness, stigma had not decreased. In some cases, it worsened. People were less likely in 2006 than in 96 to say they would be willing to have a person with schizophrenia as a neighbor. This contradiction, more knowledge but less acceptance, highlights the fact that reducing stigma requires more than facts. It requires human connection and cultural change. So what does work? Studies by Corrigan and colleagues, 2012-2019, have shown that one of the most effective methods is interpersonal contact. When people engage in positive, equal status interactions with individuals who have mental illness, they are more likely to change their attitudes. This isn't about celebrities or scripted testimonials. It's about everyday people interacting in meaningful ways. Education also plays a critical role. Mental health literacy, knowing the symptoms of mental illnesses, understanding their causes, and being aware of treatment options empowers individuals to support others and seek help themselves. At the community level, initiatives that combine housing, employment, and community inclusion help break down stereotypes. Integrating people with mental illness into everyday life normalizes difference and builds empathy. At the professional level, training clinicians to recognize their own implicit biases is essential. Even well-meaning therapists can unconsciously hold stigmatizing beliefs. Moreover, burnout among mental health workers, especially those in underfunded public systems, can erode empathy. Corrigan and Nivoglowski, 2019, highlight the need for institutional reform to support providers as well as patients. At the family level, psychoeducation and support groups provide both practical tools and emotional relief. Organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, offer programs for caregivers and family members that reduce blame, increase understanding, and connect people to broader support networks. Finally, at the cultural level, advocacy through storytelling has a powerful impact. Blogs, podcasts, and public campaigns allow people to share their experiences in authentic, relatable ways. When celebrities like Demi Lovato and Shailera Lee speak out about bipolar disorder, they use their platforms to normalize mental health conversations. Movements like Bring Change to Mind, co-founded by actress Glenn Close, use media to dismantle shame and promote inclusion. In short, stigma thrives in silence and segregation. It is dismantled through education, exposure, and empathy. When people connect, listen, and see each other as fully human, the space for stigma shrinks. Mental health care today is delivered through a multidisciplinary network of professionals, each playing a unique role in assessment, diagnosis, treatment, and support. Understanding these roles helps demystify the system and empowers individuals and families to seek the most appropriate care. Psychiatrists are medical doctors, MDs or DOs, specializing in mental health. They are the only mental health professionals who can prescribe medication in all 50 U.S. states. Psychiatrists often work with individuals experiencing severe disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and major depressive disorder. Their training includes medical school, residency in psychiatry, and often additional specialization in child, adolescent, geriatric, or forensic psychiatry. They may conduct medication management, provide diagnostic clarity, and collaborate with other mental health providers. However, due to a shortage of psychiatrists, especially in rural areas, access can be limited. Clinical psychologists typically hold a doctoral degree, PhD, PsyD, or EDD, and are trained in psychological assessment, diagnosis, and therapeutic interventions. While they usually cannot prescribe medications, with limited exceptions in some states, they are experts in conducting psychological testing and delivering evidence-based therapies such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, and psychodynamic approaches. Psychologists often work in clinics, hospitals, schools, and private practices. They play a crucial role in long-term psychotherapy and specialized evaluations for learning disabilities, ADHD, and personality disorders. Licensed clinical social workers, LCSWs, and licensed professional counselors, LPCs, focus on therapy and case management. They often work on the front lines in community mental health centers, schools, and nonprofit agencies. Their training includes a master's degree in social work or counseling and supervised clinical experience. They provide individual, group, and family therapy, help clients navigate social services, and offer crisis intervention. They are essential to linking individuals with community resources like housing, food assistance, or vocational support. Advanced practice, registered nurses, APRNs in psychiatry, are trained in both nursing and mental health care. They can evaluate, diagnose, and treat mental health conditions and, in many states, prescribe medication. Psychiatric nurses are especially important in hospital settings and primary care environments where integrated behavioral health services are expanding. An often overlooked but increasingly important role is that of the peer support specialist, individuals who have lived experience with mental illness or substance use recovery. Through certified training programs, they provide mentorship, advocacy, and hope to others navigating their recovery journey. Research shows that peer support can reduce hospitalizations and improve outcomes, especially when integrated into larger care teams. Their presence challenges stigma and demonstrates that recovery is possible. Modern mental health care is most effective when it's collaborative. For complex cases, professionals from various backgrounds come together in treatment planning. A patient with PTSD and substance use, for example, might see a psychiatrist for medication, a psychologist for therapy, and a social worker for housing support. Coordination among these providers is key to holistic recovery. As our understanding of the mind deepens, so too does the potential to revolutionize how we diagnose and treat psychological disorders. The future of mental health lies in science, technology, and social reform coming together. Advancements in brain imaging and genetic research are offering unprecedented insight into the biological underpinnings of mental disorders. The hope is to develop biomarkers, measurable biological indicators that can help tailor treatments to an individual's unique profile. This approach, known as precision psychiatry, could replace the current trial and error model of prescribing medications. Digital platforms are transforming how mental health services are accessed. From teletherapy to mental health apps, digital tools increase reach and convenience. Programs like mood trackers, CBT-based self-help modules, and AI-driven chat support offer scalable solutions, particularly for those in underserved areas. Understanding the complex evolution of psychopathology, from ancient rituals to modern neuroimaging, reminds us that mental health is not static. It is shaped by science, society, and the stories of real people. Through this episode, we've uncovered how stigma can be just as debilitating as symptoms, how definitions require nuance, and how treatment must consider culture, identity, and context. As we move forward in this series, we'll explore specific disorders in depth, but always with one mission: to illuminate, to educate, and to inspire compassion.